A very interesting piece of information was released yesterday by Blizzard. No, not information about balance tuning or changes to the specs or the dungeons or the raids. Instead, it's something a bit more global for every one of your characters, which is about your UI, your add-ons, what you're playing with on a daily basis. And it was a pretty important one because it is about Blizzard's, let's just say, intent to limit, draw back a little bit the power of certain add-ons, but also implement some of the already existing add-ons into the official default UI of the game. Now, we are already used with the recently added Cooldown Manager in the game that was added a while ago in 11.1. But that was just the beginning. Now, the biggest point of this was, of course, the effects that add-ons can have in competitive content. Ion Azikostas, our dear lead game designer of WoW, was pointing out that if you want to participate in competitive content, there are certain add-ons that are pretty much required. And to him, one day, there's a hope that once you can customize your UI and similar other add-ons, when you're going into competitive content, there won't be a sense that you're holding yourself back if you're not using those add-ons. And they want to build up the base UI functionality to shrink the gap between what you need with the base UI compared to what these kind of add-ons like Weakauras are offering you. And the biggest problem he is highlighting with this requirement is the computational add-ons, these real-time combat event add-ons that can do a lot for players as they automate and calculate different mechanics for you and then give you a nice presentation in the form of icons, bars, timers or warnings in your screen, which is, as we have talked about this multiple times in the past, is currently affecting the complexity of raid encounters. And how can Blizzard design certain encounters because they have to take into account these kind of add-ons exist? Ion points out as an example that they used to be doing more coordination requirement mechanics, but in recent times they have stopped doing those nearly as much because these kind of coordination mechanics are solved more easily by things like Weakauras, so they have pivoted more to things like dodging beams, dodging lasers, dodging swirlies, because this is not much about any Weakaura can do, you just have to dodge stuff. We have also seen in the past Blizzard having to step in when they thought the Weakauras was doing a bit too much to make the mechanic private, to not make it possible for a Weakaura to actually see what the ability was going to do and give you information about it. And as he points out, the goal is disarmament. They want to, down the line, restrict what combat event add-ons can access in real time. But they know they can't do it now. They know that right now they simply can't do, okay, Weakauras no longer gets access to our API events, so that they can no longer track all of these things, because they know players still need these tools. So they first have to build some replacement of these tools themselves in the base UI before they can start removing these kind of features from the add-ons. And then he points out as a positive that once they have started removing these add-ons allowed to have computational calculations and give you out these kind of informations, they can start developing mechanics for bosses that can once again be more about coordination and timing without knowing that you won't have access to a Weakaura to solve that mechanic for you. So really a lot of the brand of the talk was about the power of Weakauras. Of course, they still went on to other basic UI things they would want to have, like for example a bossmods. BigWigs or DBM, whatever you're using, they want an equivalent of that in the game. Another thing would be details. As Ion points out, the damage meter is the most used add-on in the game. It's what most players go down to use first. What knowledge they want to have first in the game is how much damage am I doing. So it's another thing they want to cook into the default UI as well. And then the last one being nameplates. Nameplate improvement rather than of course, most other players just using a plater add-on for their nameplates. But a lot of these would just be flavor changes, right? Having a damage meter, having better nameplates, having bars in the game, you know, DBM or BigWigs are just not really adding anything extra. They're just putting bars of when mechanics are happening. Blizzard would just take onto that and put them in the game as their default UI. What is more relevant is Blizzard hasn't pointed out they are planning to change or restrict what these things can or cannot do. For example, they haven't said we want to put BigWigs or DBM as part of the default UI, so we can start restricting which bars can be shown, which bars cannot be shown, or we want to have our own nameplate add-on, so we can stop you from using the nameplate cast helper, the one that puts the cooldown next to the nameplate of thrash mobs in Mythic Plus, for example, to help you. That's not really what is being removed there. The bigger brand of what is going to be put in check more is Weakauras, computational add-ons that can help you do things like, for example, Ion gave the example of if right now in game there is a mechanic which you have to do something at when you have a debuff, only when you have 4 to 7 stacks of that debuff. What is the default UI going to do for that? Nothing. You have in the top right, close to your minimap, a debuff with a stack counter, and that's it. That's the only way for you to actually see your debuff counter. That is not a very good UI to have if you're doing competitive content. Meanwhile, with a Weakaura, you can simply get a big icon next to your character, which starts to glow if you get past 4 stacks. It starts to shoot a siren if you get to 5 or 6 stacks, and it turns your screen fucking red if you get to 7 stacks. Those are all things a Weakaura can do that is going to significantly simplify that mechanic. But the key takeaway from the entire talk that Ion had was the fact that the plan is to remove the functionality of these add-ons over time, as their functionality is replaced by the default UI, while still keeping the challenge the same. As mentioned again, removing some of the functionality of these Weakauras could allow certain mechanics to make a comeback, certain mechanics that right now you don't see nearly as often because a Weakaura would trivialize them much more. If you remove the ability for a Weakaura to actually solve that mechanic that more easily, that mechanic could make a comeback. Now, this is where the question mark though comes through. Because in-game right now, we already have something that came a few weeks ago, right? In our options, advanced options, enable Cooldown Manager, right? You have this thing, which is just a far inferior version to whatever you can cook up yourself in a Weakaura, right? Even more so, even if you went to edit mode, this is just not, like, it's not even, you know, it's not even that heavily customizable besides the size and whatnot. If you wanted to remove some of these, like I don't care about the cooldown of my reversion, for example. How do I get rid of this? How do I remove this, for example, right? And this has been here for quite a while, and it has not really been updated in any way by Blizzard. You also don't really have any customizable option. It will be the same for everyone, right? Right now, for example, I can open my Weakaura, and for the Evoker, I have one that I can use in Mythic Plus, and then set up one I can use in the Raid to be spread for my Raid frames, remove a whole bunch of stuff I don't care about, like utility, CC and whatnot, I don't want to see in the Raid, right? This is something you can do with a Weakaura, and definitely not something you will be able to do with the Cooldown Manager offered to you by Blizzard. There is also another thing, like the edit mode itself. This one at this point is a few years old, and there hasn't really been any significant improvement to this system. So of course, the question mark is, how are we to expect that whatever Blizzard adds as a default feature in the UI, it won't be such a low level grade alternative to what add-ons can already give us? For example, Ion made the mention of the damage meters to be put in game. But damage meters like this one, for example, have already, for example, multiple tools, multiple informational points you can get from details, like a series, you know, a series of different plugins you can use, right? You have the encounter breakdown, the raid check, the action tracker, you have the chart viewers, advanced death logs, the timelines, all of these things that can give you even more information. Would any of this even remotely make it into a default UI version of your damage meter? So the question is, even if there was an in-game default damage meter, how many would give up details to just use that default one? And this is a very simple one, because a damage meter is a very straightforward add-on. What about once you get into the way more complex one like Weakauras? The worry here, that's the worry. The worry here is that Blizzard is going to cook things by default into the UI and start removing them as add-ons. It will start no longer, for example, allowing certain API endpoints to be tracked by Weakauras, so Weakauras can no longer make those Weakauras work, because now they are part of the default UI, but now the service provided to the player is much worse. You have much fewer customization options, what is being given to you is clunkier, is not nearly as high quality as what you had with your Weakauras to begin with. It is the same thing also with things like Blizzard mentioning wanting to put better nameplates in the game, right? Okay, we simplify and streamline and improve our nameplates, but can they still beat Plater? You know, what Plater can do? All of the extra plugins or scripting you can add with Plater, like for example things like fixate on you, Plater change the nameplate, changing the color of cast bars on nameplates if they are tank masters, or highlighting the important dangerous casts in Mythic Plus, pandemic glows for the dots on targets you want to refresh, and all these other things, as well as being able to have very easy ways to edit everything. Like for example, if you enter a dungeon and you go through a key, you will have a list of all of these, for example, the spells and abilities that were used in that dungeon for you to very quickly edit and go through, find their ID, for example, to then, for example, use in your Weakauras. Buff tracking, you know, if you want to show or not show some of these things in your nameplates, right? Is the default UI really going to get anywhere close to something this thorough and this detailed? And the answer is very unlikely. The answer is likely the product will still be far inferior to what this add-on can already provide you. It will definitely be mostly a very good thing as a bridge, you know, a gateway for more casual, laid-back, entry-level players to get used to this type of extra information, because to go from a completely naked UI to start getting used to better nameplates, better customization for your nameplates, for your damage meter, the boss mods being already in the game, is still better than having nothing. It's definitely not for the more competitive level, competitive tier players who then feel like they are losing something rather than having gained something. So as long as these kind of players still have the ability to retain all of these untouched add-ons and still play with them, then it shouldn't really be a problem. After all, Blizzard's main mention of restricting the add-ons and the disarmament of add-ons and scaling back on the size of add-ons was really mainly aimed at Weakauras, on the restriction of add-on capability when it comes to the Weakaura ability of computational add-ons, computational Weakauras to warn you or simplify certain mechanics. It would be good. It would be good, of course, in a perfect world if this were to go down very smoothly, if we were able to transition from limiting more and more your Weakaura to, at some point becoming practically only cosmetic. If your Weakaura practically turned into an add-on to show your spec suite, so your spec abilities and cooldowns to track those things only, and then everything else related to the actual encounter, the casts, the interrupts, the mechanics, both from Weakaura and from your boss mods, if those were smoothly transitioned to now be in Blizzard's possession. And so then now Blizzard has the ability to choose what they want or not want to show you, what they want or not want to have to be notified, what you can get from just looking at the game itself, the audio cues, the the movement, the color of the swirlies or the stuff on the ground, rather than simply having a Weakauras tell you what's about to happen. If we were to transition to exactly that, then it would be very good. It's just that, you know, given what we have been seeing, how Blizzard, the first attempt at Blizzard stepping their foot into transitioning an add-on into an in-game basic UI feature, it hasn't looked that great right now. There will definitely be a lot of work to be done. We will see also the absolute state of what will come in 11.1.7, so I guess in a month and a half or so, which Blizzard also announced. Hekili, pretty much your rotation helper, is actually going to come out in 11.1.7. It will either light up the next button you are going to press or straight up give you the famed Swifty one-shot macro, literally a one-button thing you keep pressing and it will go through, it will cycle through a rotation, at the deficit though of having a slower GCD as a penalty. And it's pretty funny, of course, because just as an example of showing Blizzard, you know, trying to make this their own thing, they showed the example of the Assassination Rogue one-button macro, and it was, you know, hilariously wrong. The rotation made no sense, etc., etc. But of course, that isn't something that would be expected to be used by very, you know, very high up, very competitive players. It would be more for the lower down, laid back, more casual players, of course. We will see, of course, in the future. This is still not really have any kind of ETA, or it's not really something that will happen anywhere near this expansion, for example. If anything, we might start hearing something by the beginning or by the first patch of the next expansion at the very, very earliest. So there is still, of course, time to see, I guess, how Blizzard will develop this this notion of wanting to scale down on the power of add-ons. At least now we have a declaration of intent from Blizzard on what they want to do with these kind of add-ons. I guess we will have to see now in the future how exactly will they execute these. But for today though, on this Thursday, which is now to leave each other after this announcement from Blizzard. We're starting, as usual, our goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, okay, first time of like proper, straight up, confirmed warm weather. It's 25 degrees at the beginning of May, which is still somewhat slightly high, but for now we will take it.